Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you all for this EMEA Euro-Mediterranean Economist Association webinar on remittances, labor markets, migration and digitalization in Africa and Middle East. What to expect post COVID-19. This webinar is organized under the umbrella of EMEA Regional Policy Research Initiative on COVID-19, which we launched on the 18th of March 2020. Its main objective is to facilitate shaping future policy responses and actions toward enhancing our socioeconomic resilience in Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa. In April, we have published an EMEA study that proposed a policy assessment framework for EMEA Monitor, which we have it to track on a weekly basis policy responses performance of countries in 3 regions. So all of this information, you have it publicly accessible on our website. This monitoring covers policy measures like, for example, health system preparedness, containment and decontainment policies, economic preparedness and recovery, and overall effectiveness to respond to this pandemic, but also to identify and mitigate the socioeconomic consequences and to provide some policy recommendations for future development model post-pandemic. We also have published a number of policy papers to provide policy proposals and guidance on key topics such as economic transparency, financial inclusion, digitalization, labor market, and migration plus the green economy. So as I mentioned, everything is publicly accessible, so please visit our website. Now, today, I'm very honored to welcome an impressive lineup of distinguished speakers and discussants from international organization, think tank, and academia. So let me welcome our speakers, Ralph Chami, who is an assistant director at the International Monetary Fund and member of EMEA Advisory Board. Welcome to you, my friend, Ralph. Ekkehard Ernst, who is the chief macroeconomist at the International Labour Organization and president of the Geneva Macro Labs. Welcome to you, Ekkehard. Dilip Ratha, who is the lead economist of the World Bank, and he will be able to join us in the next half an hour. And then I'm very happy to have as a discussant Cinzia Alcidi from the Center for European Policy Studies and a member of EMEA Executive Board. Welcome you all. And I would like also to welcome all the participants who have registered in this webinar. Now, I want to share with you a few aspects of this webinar. So this webinar content and discussions are public and are live broadcasted on Facebook. So whoever is not able to access the meeting today, they will be able to do it via Facebook. EMEA team will later publish a recording of this webinar on our website, and then a report that summarizes the main discussion points. So this is also will be published on our website. So let us start. The objective of this webinar is to discuss very important challenges from the recent, especially from the recent declining of remittances, which they have reached to up to 100 billion USD declined. And this is an impressive amount of money which some of the countries have been benefiting from. And these are the data for 2020, just now. I mean, I think it was March or April. Now, what is also important is to see the consequences of this decline on the economies, on the labor market and labor migration during the COVID-19, and also the conditions for digitalization to become a resilience pillar for economic recovery. And we are focusing our discussion today on Africa and the Middle East. So let me start to invite Ralph to give the first introductory speech on these matters. Please, Ralph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Reen. Good morning, good afternoon to all. Thank you, Reen, for this wonderful invite to talk about this timely and important topic, and to be on the panel with my colleagues, Dilip and Ekkehard, also, and Cinzia. Let me first see if I can share my my presentation. Okay, are you able to see it? Can you view it?
Yes, very well, yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So what I want to talk about is, of course, remittances and the impact of the COVID crisis on remittances, and what does that mean for the countries that have relied on remittances for so many years. The narrative starts in remittances have always been viewed as a lifeline for many of the low income, middle income, and fragile states. What's really strange about this situation is that this lifeline now has become the unintended channel of transmission of the crisis, of the COVID crisis, over and above every other channel of transmission of the COVID crisis. One can think of other channels through which this crisis now is buffeting the rest of the world, through the trade channel, the tourism channel, and so forth. But turns out that remittances have turned from this lifeline now to a channel of transmission of COVID crisis itself. And I'll describe how, and then sort of highlight what are the implications for countries and what could be done about it. All right, so let's start the discussion by sort of, remittances are the flip side of migration. People leave their countries most of the time involuntarily, and they cross the seas or land and end up in other countries where they make a living. And from that living, they send money home. So the estimates coming actually from Ekkehard's shop is there are about 165 million migrant workers worldwide. And about 42% or so are female and the rest are males. And about 70% are residing in high income and in rich countries. And they send a typical remitter sends a few $100s a month back home. But when you add them up together, the latest estimate coming from Dilip's workshop is about $550 billion in 2019. And that's only through the official channels. A lot more goes through the unofficial channels. So this phenomenon has been going on for many years. And so remittances have been viewed as major flows into low income and fragile states. And indeed, if you look at this graph, it's coming out of one of our forthcoming papers, is that you can see that the blue line is saying that, well, the remittances dwarf any other flows. When you think of the flows that come into low income and fragile states, remittances are the major source of flows. They dwarf FDIs, they dwarf official aid, and they certainly dwarf portfolio investments. And they've been so reliable for so long that countries have come to rely on them as a source of income, and I'll talk about it in a minute. And families rely on them, countries have come to rely on them. And the first chart on the left basically is just giving you ideas of the top 10 countries, top 10 recipients of official remittances, and you can see Tajikistan and others where the remittances are at the minimum are up to 40% of GDP. That means if you are, you're walking down the street in one of these countries, and you have $100 in your pocket, most likely $40 out of that 100 is from your sister or brother or mother or even father abroad or cousin sending you money that you are using to help you out in country of origin. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that the reason that we call them reliable because they are the least volatile of all of the flows. So remittances this is volatility measures. And you can see that remittances, even relative to official aid, they are far less volatile. So they're certainly less volatile than foreign direct investment and other type of private flows. And relative to exports of these countries, they're far less volatile. So they're reliable, they're viewed as reliable, and they're viewed as stable. And so because they've been reliable and stable for so long, households have gotten used to using them. And what do they use them for? A typical household back home gets money, uses them, of course, to increase their consumption of all kinds of goods, domestic goods, foreign goods, and to buffer them against shocks, to exogenous shocks to their consumption or to their income. And of course, they also use them to spend on healthcare and on education of their children, of themselves. And some of the households would like to start a business and they can't get credit. In many of these countries, they can't get credit from the banks. So the remittances have been viewed as a source of credit that people have used to start a business. So they alleviate credit constraints. And of course, this follows, the last one follows that they've been used to increase self-employment. And there's evidence, this is work I've done with actually Ekkehard, that remittances seems to increase informality. The question now becomes, are the remittances safe from COVID? And this comes from Dilip's shop. And I would like you to focus on the last part here. It turns out that remittances have also succumbed to the impact of the COVID crisis, because as the COVID crisis has affected the economies, the high income and rich countries where many of these remitters live and work, they've lost their employment. And when they've lost their employment, their ability to send money home has precipitously declined. And the estimates, as you put it, Reem, is about 100 billion or 20% drop relative to 2019. That's one way to read this. The other way to read this is, if you notice, all the flows are dropping together. You see the remittances are dropping. You see the FDIs are dropping. You see portfolio flows are dropping, and ODA, who knows, may actually also drop itself as the rich countries look inwards and less outwards. Now, what's so special about this is that I've been working on this for 22 years, 23 years. I have never seen this before like this. Because typically you think of when a country has a shock, suffers a shock of some sort, typically people on the outside, family on the outside that are working in other countries, send money home. So whenever you have a downturn in the country of origin, you have people in abroad sending money home to help their families. So we call remittances are counter-cyclical, okay? And so you would imagine that if countries are suffering from COVID, especially the low-income fragile states are suffering from COVID crisis, you would expect money from abroad to, in terms of remittances, come home to alleviate the pain. But this is not happening. What you're looking at here is that as the FDIs and portfolio flows are flowing out of these countries due to the crisis, due to the impact of the crisis on the economy, remittances are not coming in. And that I have never seen that magnitude, and maybe Dilip can elaborate on this even more. In all my work on remittances, we saw a little bit of it in 2008 when we had the Great Recession, but nothing of this magnitude. This is because everybody's hit, so there's no money coming home to help those people. But what does that mean? What does it mean when remittances are not coming home or dropping precipitously? So now you go back to what were the households using that money for? They were using it to increase their consumption. So remittances come in, your disposable income goes up, you use it to consume more. Obviously, when you're not getting those remittances, you're going to suffer a drop in consumption. That means you have less money to spend on public health and education. That means you can't start a business. That means even to keep your business running, you're going to have to borrow. And this time you are not borrowing from family abroad. You need to borrow from strangers or from banks, and good luck getting any of that credit from banks. And as a result, what you're going to see is that many of these people that were relying on these remittances, now they have to seek employment or underemployment just to make ends meet. But the effect goes more from the micro now to the macro. See, in many of those countries, when the household was using the remittances to increase its consumption, the consumption base expanded. And many governments around that in those countries realized that people use remittances to increase their consumption, their spending. So they put taxes on those activities in order to capture that the fiscal, sort of increase their fiscal buffers. And for example, they used the value-added tax or sales tax or import tax because they knew a lot of that remittance money was used to increase imports or to increase consumption. Well, now the opposite is going to happen. When people are not able to spend, the consumption base is going to shrink. When the consumption base is going to shrink, that means there's going to be a drop in the consumption tax revenue for these countries. And it means that the government now has a greater burden in terms of increasing its spending on public health because people can't use the remittance money to do so. Even in terms of debt service, because there are many studies that show countries that have received remittances, they've been able to extend their sustainability, their debt sustainability, and lower the cost of funding. Well, now it's just the opposite, because remittances are dollars or rubles, what have you, foreign currency coming in. You're not going to be seeing it anymore. As a result, that can lead to increase in debt service. Even when we talk about forget remittances, everybody says, well, during the COVID crisis, governments should engage in counter-cyclical measures to buffer the drop in consumption and to help people. Well, in those countries, with what money are they going to do that? Okay, because remittance revenue has come down, that means tax revenue has come down, that decreases the ability of these governments to engage in counter-cyclical measures to shore up their citizens. But the effect is not only fiscal, it also goes into the financial and the private sector. You see how do remittances get into our countries, into the, sort of the Middle East and Africa? The official ones go through the banking system. One thing you have to understand about remittances, banks view remittances as a stable source of funding for them. And not only stable, it's also cheap, because when you're sending money home to help your family, that's viewed that these remittances are altruistically motivated. So the banks don't have to do anything to attract these deposits into their coffers. So they've been viewed as a stable, from the bank's perspective, in those fragile states, low-income states, middle-income states, they viewed those remittances as a cheap source of funding. Well, that's now going to disappear. In fact, it is disappearing. So there's a drop in cheap bank deposits, that means remittances. That is going to have a knockoff effect on what the banks are able to do on the asset side. So it will impair the ability of the banks to lend, which means it's going to raise the cost of funding for borrowers. And banks in those countries typically not necessarily lend to the private sector, they lend to the government. So the ability of the government to borrow from the local banks is going to be hampered. And as a result, that's going to have a negative impact on the bank capital and on bank stability. There are also going to be consequences for the monetary policy. In what sense? For many of these countries that rely on remittances, we've done studies and upon studies that show that many of these countries follow a fixed exchange rate. Well, what's going to happen now when the remittances have dropped? The ability that reserves that were being built up because remittances were flowing in, those reserves are dwindling if they haven't evaporated already. That means there are going to be devaluation pressures. And even for those countries that have some kind of a floating regime, they're going to see depreciation of their currency. But here's the sad part of this, is that you're going to get the devaluation pressures and you're going to get the depreciation pressures, but there's no upside to this, in the sense that typically we think, well, if a country's exchange rate depreciates or the country devalues its exchange rate, maybe there's be benefit in cheaper exports. Maybe tourism would be cheaper and therefore in the future they'll see tourists coming in. But in this case, there's no one coming because the tourists are supposed to come from the other countries and the other countries have been hit. So they don't have the purchasing power to come and visit this country, nor are they going to come because of the COVID fears. And nor are you going to be able to export yourself out of this problem because there's no one on the other side that's going to demand your product. So when you put that all together, that means the end result of this is a shrinkage of the economies in these fragile and low-income states that depend on remittances. Okay. There's also labor market pressures in the sense that these remittances were being used to increase self-employment. As I said before, well, when you don't have that money, the self-employed are going to lose that cheap source of funding. They may have to fold, they're going to lose their jobs. And typically in many of these studies upon studies have shown that in many of these circumstances, females unfortunately are the first to suffer. So you're going to find unemployment, and you're going to find unemployment highest among the females. And they're going to all end up in the labor market looking for jobs in already markets that are brimming with the unemployed, and unemployed, especially among the youth, high among the youth. So all of this is going to create severe pressures on the social safety nets in these countries. If that weren't enough, okay, when the migrants lose their jobs in rich countries and high-income countries, in many of these countries, once you lose your job, you lose your residency. Okay, so which means you have to leave. The other part of this, now we're talking about the migrants themselves, is many of them are housed in really dire circumstances, 20, 30 to a room. Okay, so what's happened when the COVID pandemic hit, it hit hardest among, or highest rate of infection is among these migrant workers because of their housing situation. So now you lose your job because the economy in which you have been working has been hit, and you're more likely to be infected. And then you are now forced to have to go home. Well, you're going home to where? To a country that's already having a very hard time dealing with, in normal times, they're having a hard time managing their economy, but now having a harder time managing their COVID crisis among the citizens. And now the migrants are coming back, most likely without a job, without any income, and infected. So all of this is going to lead to a rise in what we call underemployment or unemployment, increase in informality and working poverty. All this possibly leads to economic contraction in these countries, and again, more pressure, more social pressures within these economies. This is what I call the boomerang effect, which means this is in the fact that remittances have dropped and migrants may be forced to go home, adding more pressures, is not the end of the story. There's something I call the boomerang effect, which means when that pressure builds up so much, there's going to be spill over beyond the borders of these recipient countries. What we may end up seeing, if we're not seeing it already, new and more intense refugee problem, but where to? They're going to, be boats or land by sea, whichever way, try to get to higher ground, if you like. But unfortunately now the rich countries are now less open, as we know, the narrative has changed, and they're less capable of taking care of the refugees, and therefore they're less likely to accept them. Okay, everybody's turning inwards, unfortunately, just when we need the opposite to happen. So what must we do? Okay, first thing is to realize that there's a role for everyone to play in order to solve or to mitigate this crisis, right? So the way I did it, to break it down, what must host countries do? That means the rich countries, okay, and high income countries. First of all, we have to realize I'm sitting in the United States, realize that migrant workers are part and parcel of our economy. They're the ones who work in the fields. They're the ones who are doing the work that many of the citizens don't want to do. And when they don't do it, there is no one to replace them. So it's in our best interest to keep them employed, because if we want to restart, as we are restarting now, in Europe we're restarting, in other countries trying to restart, we rely on these migrant workers as part of the input into the output. So whatever we do for our own citizens in terms of protecting our citizens, we should extend that protection safety net also to the migrant workers, be it in terms of ensuring the paycheck, whatever I'm getting as an American citizen, the fellow migrant worker who's been working side by side with me should be also getting a paycheck, including employment protection. We should extend the social protection to them. we should improve their accommodations. We all know the dire states that those migrant workers have been suffering through year in, year out, and maybe it's high time we do something about this. We also know about the high cost of remitting, and we've been talking about it forever. The SDG, I believe, 10 talks about reducing the cost of remitting, and perhaps now is high time that we do something about it. And there are many wonderful ideas out there as how to do so in order to reduce the monopoly that some of the intermediaries have had for so many years in terms of maintaining a high cost of remitting. And that involves the use of digitization and fintech, and I can get into that if there's a question. What can IFIs meaning what can international financial institutions do? Well, what is it that we do? We provide technical assistance, and there's going to be tremendous need for that. The countries are going to need financial assistance, and definitely we are doing it, including my own organization and others. We should be doing it, engaging more on that level. There are issues that countries, those countries need in terms of health issues, shoring them up in terms of more testing and anything that they need in order to be able to control, because they will not be able to do it on their own. Okay, and of course there's the shoring up of the fiscal and balance of payment needs, and we're already seeing evidence of that. Finally, I'd like to say something that the idea from this presentation is to say we are all in this together. And what I want you to picture is the following. I worked on the 2008 global financial crisis. Back then, the epicenter of that crisis was the US and sort of spread to Europe. Asia, more or less, was immune to this. So Asia was able to, by continuing their economies to function more or less, they're able to pull us out of this crisis. This time around, we're all hit. We're all in it together. So imagine yourself, you fall into a river with a very strong current that is about to swallow you under. And then you look, and on the bank of the river, there's someone that throws you a lifeline, and you grab that lifeline, and that person pulls you out of the current to the safety of the bank. That was 2008. That was Asia pulling us out. This time around is completely different. This time around, we are all in it. Asia, Europe, you name it, we're all in this together in the river, in a very strong current that is about to suck us all into deep into the water. And we're all tied together by what I call a belt of humanity. We either all get together and pull ourselves out, because no one can do this on their own, or all of us are going to sink in together. So I'd like to think that we're going to do what's right for ourselves and for others, and work together to get ourselves out of this predicament. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great presentation. In fact, I see a very bleak picture as you portrayed it with your assessment here. What we are going to see going forward, and we are already seeing it, it's an increase of unemployment, informality, poverty, social pressures, where there will be even further pressures on the fiscal policies of certain countries. And then obviously we are already seeing it, a refugee crisis, hunger crisis, humanitarian problems. And I have a few questions, because I couldn't stop myself from asking this one. In one of the first slides you mentioned, so you showed that the largest recipients of remittances as percentage of GDP, I didn't see any country from Africa, Middle East. How do you explain this? Is it because they are not receiving high remittances, or because you don't have data?
No, we do. It's just I was showing the first 10. Okay. That's all. But right before that, you will see Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt and Morocco and Tunisia and Syria and certainly Africa is a big player in here. I mean, I could have shown you if I went down by like up to 20, you would have seen Africa and the Middle East in it. If I may say something, Reem, regarding Africa. I was in the Middle East department during the global financial crisis. And I was looking at remittances into Africa at the time. In fact, we published a paper on that. And what was interesting that in the global recession, Africa was not too much hit because the African migration is mostly within Africa. So, the flow of remittances more or less was not hit. Unfortunately, this time the pandemic is affecting Africa, so it doesn't really matter where you are. So Africa will not be immune, and it's not, and we're seeing it right now from that crisis in terms of the remittance flow. So you're going to see that Africa will also be suffering a precipitous drop in remittances, just like everybody else.
A second question, which also part of what, I mean, a reaction on one of the slides, the remittances has shown a decline, steep decline during the first quarter of 2020, but then I see a slight pickup. Can I be optimistic for that, or it's not really note of optimism?
May I defer that to when Dilip shows up? This comes out of his shop.
So I will ask you this question again.
I have my views, but I think this is his chart, so I let him defend it.
But another point which I would have expected ODA to increase rather than to decrease. Yes. And yes. I am surprised why also we've seen a complete or dramatic decrease in the first quarter. I mean, I'm a bit surprised with that because, I mean, we've seen that a lot of official, assistance, financial assistance over the years, but over the months, but then I do not know why we've seen that steep decline, but anyway.
Yeah, ODA, as you know, as we all know, for the sake of the audience, unlike remittances, unlike FDIs, it's a political decision. It's government to government, if you like. It's official development aid. Remittances are person to person. So you have to think of what are the political pressures that are building up in those countries and whether they can justify to their citizens now that they're sending money overseas to other countries that are in need while they need the money home. I mean, it's a different dynamics than when we talk about me sending money to help my mother back home, which is a remittances, or an FDI, which is mostly it's kind of a capital flow rather than income flow.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to turn now to Ekkehard. So Ekkehard, what we heard from Ralph, that there has been huge pressure on the labor market. So are we really going into serious job losses, increase of unemployment, scarce employment, plus the role of digitalization, which is helping on one hand, but also having the opposite impact on the other hand, because nowadays many jobs are being digitalized. So also there is a kind of job losses there. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rima, and thank you to EMEA to invite us, or me here. Thanks also to be part of this excellent panel with Ralph and Dilip. Let me share my screen and go into that slide here up right away. Yeah, here we go. So indeed, I mean, I would say that to your last question and to start with that, it's indeed what we are seeing is not only that we're going into a large labor market crisis, we are already very much in the middle of it. And I'll show you some pictures, some charts from our recent work. For those of you who have followed ILO's work in the last 3-4 months, we have produced regular ILO COVID monitors that give us a bit of a better picture on different items and different dimensions to this labor market crisis, which I want to show you here. And then I will indeed pick up on that point you mentioned about digitalization, also in relation to Ralph's presentation and his point about digitalization being one of the possible answers to that crisis. Let's first look at maybe some of the I would say almost surprising effects of the crisis on sub-Saharan African Arab states. in a sense that these countries have actually experienced much stricter workplace closures than many other countries, especially in Europe. So if you don't have the comparison here with Europe, you can see that in our publications, but you can see that even in African countries, at the peak of the crisis, almost 90% of people were in some form of workplace closure, and so were basically prevented from working. If you think about a lot of these people working in informal situation where they have basically not a regular contract, but rather a daily wage or daily earnings, you can imagine how much of an immediate impact this has on their poverty, on their livelihood, etc. So this is certainly an extremely quick and widespread impact on livelihoods in these two regions, and it has obviously had an immediate impact on the world of work, at least when we look at working hours. So here we don't have employment figures, we have working hours, because a lot of the measures that we actually have for these different countries do not allow us to have to translate that into actual numbers of people lost, but rather it's more like the numbers of hours lost. And if you can look at here, if you see that you have different country breakdowns depending on the level of income and the depending of the geographical region, you see that the first region was really Asia and the Pacific, obviously with China, the origin of the outbreak, but then it quickly spread to the rest of the world, and we saw already in the second quarter, I mean, an enormous drop across all regions, and that reflects a bit what Ralph was saying earlier, is that enormous drop in all regions of over 10, 12%, sometimes almost up to 20%. Americas particularly badly hit, especially in the United States. And we don't actually see much of a geographical difference here. It's really all regions, all countries, regardless of the level of income that are being affected. And in some countries, this has been solved differently. So the loss on working hours, as I said before, does not necessarily translate into number of jobs lost. And you can see that in this chart. So this is only as for a selected number of countries for which we have microdata at the high level of frequency. You see that these loss of working hours do not necessarily translate into loss of jobs. So sometimes it does. So loss of jobs is basically the dark red. Here you see for the United States and for Canada, this does translate into quite a significant job loss. In many countries, especially in many developing countries like Peru and Mexico, it translates basically loss into inactivity. And basically these people cannot work. They cannot even be informally work because they're not supposed to be outside. So they have no other way than just staying at home and waiting that the crisis disappears. And as I said, this has an immediate impact on their livelihoods and an immediate increase in poverty. And then you see some other ways of obviously was dealing this, and Korea is one example. The United Kingdom, Germany would fall into that category as well, where you basically have a reduction in the work week, so people are still being officially counted as employed, but essentially the state is taking over and subsidizing these jobs so that they don't necessarily get to laid off from their employer. So very different country reactions depending on the level of development and then depending on the state capacity that these different countries dispose of. What is interesting and what is important, especially for the transmission mechanism of these shocks throughout the world, is that this one thing is the pandemic itself. The other thing is this ripple effects across different supply chains. And so we try to identify a bit what type of industries are particularly hard hit by this crisis, and what are the industries that would be extremely for which it would be extremely difficult to recover quickly after the confinement measures have been eased. And you see that low-skilled manufacturing, not only, but low middle-skilled manufacturing like textiles, some basic metals, maybe even fabricated metals. These are in this kind of middle category where the supply chain is reasonably the supply chain impact is reasonably high because on the one hand, countries depend on a relatively limited number of countries from which they source in their supplies, and at the same time they have a large share of imports into the supply chain. So this would, especially for North African countries, this would be an important part of the transmission mechanisms to which they get hit in their economies. Whereas, I mean, these other categories like motor vehicles or transport, this is typically something that is mostly among advanced economies where this plays out. So one important issue, I think, and this Ralph alluded to it a bit, and I wanted to elaborate here on a bit more, is that youth employment is, or young people are typically the ones that are the hardest hit by this type of crisis. We saw this already in the 2008-2009 crisis. Youth unemployment rate went up significantly. This famous NEET rate, the not in education and not in employment, education or training rate, goes up significantly as well. So these are young people. They in principle could work. They have some kind of first education, but they have nowhere else to go. There's no jobs for them. They cannot go back to training. They often don't have the resources to, let's say, take up a university degree, etc. And so it immediately increases their labor underutilization rate. What is more is that the impact on training and education centers itself has also been extremely high. So there is not only that these young people who had a job lost it, but also those who were in education or were planning to go to education do no longer have the means and can no longer follow up on their previous education. So you actually not only have a lost generation in terms of the employment, you also have a long-term ripple effect in terms of their potential participation in the labor market through being better educated, having skills, having competences that are being demanded from the labor market. And if you think about this the already high share of unemployment among young people, especially in North Africa and Middle Eastern countries, you see that this is actually an enormous danger that comes out of this crisis, that we see another hit to that already challenged labor market for young people in these countries. Then one other aspect that is, I think, is very specific to this crisis, and we had heard about this already a bit before, is that it is really a female crisis, a women's crisis, in a sense that the impact on women has been much higher the impact on the labor market has been much higher for women than for men. That was not always the case. In the last crisis, 2008, 2009, men had been hit much more because it was mostly in the manufacturing sector that the international linkages were taking place. Here you see that sectors where women are predominantly employed are the ones that are mostly hit. And that is partly related to the fact that a lot of care work needed to be done, and care work is for better or worse, typically a task that falls upon the shoulders of women. And so they were called upon back home, back to their houses to take care of their sick, their elderly, etc. Sometimes often being exposed themselves to the disease, and so having to deal with this much more than men. And you see again a bit of a variation. I mean, Africa, actually, our sub-Saharan African countries seem to be dealing a bit better with this, but Arab states, for instance, as a region where women in any case already have a low participation in the employment rate, and nevertheless are being hit much more than men. And certainly something to kind of take into account when designing policies coming out of this crisis. So we, in our last COVID-19 monitor that came out last week, we kind of speculated a bit about what is the kind of outlook for labor markets for the next half year or so. And so we have done a baseline projection for the end of the year, and then a pessimistic and an optimistic scenario. And if you look at the baseline outlook, it's extremely dire for Americans. I mean, there will be a recovery. We see, as I said before, we are currently at a loss of around 12 to 20%, depending on the region you're looking at. We see some recovery by the end of the year, but we still will be below the 2019 the Q4 2019 level. by at least 4 to 4.5%. In Africa, maybe a bit less. In the Americans, again, partly or mostly related to this really underperforming labor market in the US, almost 8%. In Europe, a bit in the middle somewhere. The optimistic outlook, if we get to that, the optimistic outlook would be that in both sub-Saharan African countries and the Arab states, we would be basically almost at par with what we have been seeing at the end of last year. If the situation deteriorates, and it looks like that we are currently already in a second wave, then there might be a risk that we actually see a further drop and basically be stagnating at the level at which we are currently around 10–15% or so. So how do we get out of this? And I think it's an important point here. This is taken from a paper from people from Oxford University, but I think the message applies more or less to all countries, and that's not specific to the UK. On the blue line or the blue bars basically indicate the amount of openness of reopening the economy. As the pre-lockdown, 100% of the economy is open, and then you have different scenarios depending on how intensive you're opening up the economy. Comparison lockdown, or if you only open manufacturing, construction, etc., and all open, which means basically it's not even, you don't even go back fully to the pre-crisis situation, but you still leave like 15% of the economy closed. And what you can see is on the left side is this famous R0, which is basically an indication of how quickly the virus spreads. And ideally, this R0 should be below 1. So if R0 is below 1, then the virus dies out. If it's above, especially if it's significantly above, the virus starts spreading again. And as you can see here in these different scenarios, what would happen if you really go and open the economy even only to an 85% degree, you would start seeing the virus picking up again. And I would say, in all fairness, this is exactly what we're seeing in many countries, especially in Europe, North America, and those countries, maybe not so much Asia, that have started a much more dynamic reopening of the economy. So the fundamental message here is that as long as we haven't eradicated the virus, it's really too early to open up the economy. And the more you delay this process, the worse will be obviously the impact on the labor. So the question obviously became, and I think we are all sitting here and are an example of this, is can we use remote labor as an answer to that? Can we use digitalization for that? And the unfortunate answer to that is yes, if you have the right skills, yes, if you're in the right occupations, but most of the time, people in especially low and middle income countries are either not in the right sectors or not in the right occupation. As you see that if you're here in this on the right side, on the right chart, you see that a lot of people in computer and mathematics, business, operations, sales, and so on, these people have a capacity of almost 80% to kind of work from home. If you're on the other hand, you are occupied in farming and any kind of agriculture or even food processing, construction, extraction, etc., you are likely to be obliged to expose yourself in order to carry out your job, and that translates rather imperfectly to the extent to which this is the different sectors can be digitalized or not. But again, you see some sectors being much more obviously open to or digitalizable than others. Agriculture, again, one of those sectors, depending on which side of the occupational range you're sitting at, you have the possibility or not. Clearly, if you're in food processing or if you have to work on the fields, you have to expose yourself. If you're managing a farm, you probably could do that partly at least from home. So the remote labor is only partially an answer, and it's certainly an answer that only applies to a certain high skill category of labor. Now, the interesting question is that, does that actually mean that we should all kind of be educated and try to figure out to kind of move to these highly skilled occupations? And that was a recommendation that has been put forward along in around the discussion about the future of work. And when you look at the current developments in automation and artificial intelligence, you see that actually it might actually not be a strategy to go to work to exit or to avoid the risk of being replaced by a computer. And this is taken from a paper that was published last year, where basically the researcher has looked into different different activities, different tasks that are currently being under the scrutiny of artificial intelligence patents. So they looked at 2 different patents and identified what are the tasks that these patents are trying to replace. And you see a lot of these activities that these patents or that these AI patents are trying to replace are activities are done by high-skilled individuals that work in white-collar jobs. And you look at on the figure on the right side, and you see that at least for the United States, this would translate into an AI exposure that hits mostly people with a bachelor on postgraduate or postgraduate degree, which is to say that actually the idea that everybody needs to skill up doesn't necessarily help us to get out of the risk of losing our job. So even if you can maybe avoid the risk of being exposed to the virus by working in these occupations, the risk of kind of being replaced by a machine is still the same. And so the big question that came out of this is that what are the jobs that are left? And David Graeber had this nice title some years ago and calling these bullshit jobs. So basically jobs that we need, the person who does the job doesn't know why he or she is doing that job. And one of these bullshit jobs that are likely to remain with us are jobs around administration and compliance. So we see here, for instance, for the United States, the amount of people working in health insurance administration, they have gone up. I have talked with in Switzerland with a person who works as an accountant, and I asked him, so what is your perspective on accountant jobs? And he said, well, we are looking for these people. We can't automate these things. Another possibility that's more closer to countries in North Africa, Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa is gig workers or drivers, etc., that work for companies like Uber, etc. And so again, these are probably jobs that will basically help us replace those jobs that are being lost either to the pandemic or to digitalization. So to conclude my my presentation, I wanted to add a bit here on a couple of policy. It's not so much policy recommendation, it's rather kind of a broader framework of what we need to do. And I think that the first thing that comes to everybody's minds is that we need some new forms of taxation. I think that the idea that we continuously tax labor to the extent that we do it is really needs to be kind of revisited. We are actually putting an enormous burden on labor these days, and this is true mostly for advanced economies, but not only. We're putting enormous burden on labor that gives these incentives to replace them by machines in the first place. It's not so much that there's a technological mysteria behind it. It's really the honor that we put on labor by having all this high taxation, partly because we can't reach international agreements on how we share the burden and make corporations or consumers of digital tools pay more. Then another one, and I think that the COVID crisis to a certain extent accelerated that thing, is we need more on social security. We need to cover new forms of work through social security. COVID-19 has shown us that countries are actually capable of doing it. A lot of middle and low income countries have started putting in place social security forms that didn't have this type of protection systems before. And then 2 things, I mean, I skipped the profit sharing part. I think these are rather obvious discussion that were in the policy debate for a long time. But I think that two things that I would like to stress here is that people have complained a lot about the fact that the stock market is currently booming, despite the fact that the real economy is so weak. And part of this is because the stock market is currently composed mostly by digital companies, by Amazon, by Microsoft, by Google, etc. These are rich companies. Why is it that we don't benefit more from their richness? Well, we don't seem to be able to tax them. Maybe we can at least benefit by investing in their assets. And one of the possibilities, and this is not, I'm not the only one arguing in favor of this, is use this crisis and use and try to invest and build up funds where the national economy can benefit from this. As we have done it in the past with oil, as we have done it in Alaska with fish, we can do it with digital as well. So why is it not possible to do that in this area? And I think the last point, and I would like to get also a bit the view on my two core panelists on this, is we need to change our paradigm on our policy paradigm. We need to bring in the issue of resilience. We can no longer only focus on efficiency. I mean, we have seen it with supply chains. We've seen it with the capacity of the medical sector to react to these kind of pandemics. We don't put enough emphasis in our policy paradigm on the resilience. We put too much emphasis on efficiency, and I think that needs to be rebalanced in favor of more building up buffers, building up not only rainy day funds, but building up buffers in the real economy that help us to strengthen the resilience of our economies. I leave you with that last chart by Dilbert. I love this actually. I mean, and the question was really at the core of the debate on automation and labor markets today is, are we actually automating jobs that we shouldn't do in the first place? And I think the answer to that is yes, but unfortunately we're building up new jobs right now that are actually replacing those jobs that we shouldn't do in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this quite comprehensive and then also food for thought for discussion, because clearly I have much more questions than when I started to listen to you both, in fact, Ralph and you, Ekkehard. So I don't want to enter into the discussion because Cinzia, I'm sure you also have many questions on these matters. I would like to invite Dilip, Ratha, who will share with us a focus or an emphasis on migration, of course, remittances and migration, and then we can move into the discussion after this. Please, the floor is yours, Dilip.
Thank you, Rim. If you are not able to hear me, just let me know, or not able to see. So it's great to be part of the panel, and I enjoyed that last slide that Ekkehard put out. I had not thought about it, being efficient and doing a lot in areas where maybe we don't really need to do much to start with. But in any case, to focus back on from my side on the current situation, I'm going to draw on a recent report, semi-annual report that we put out every April and then every October, and we published one in April. And the Migration and Development Brief 32, that was the number. It was called COVID-19 Crisis Through a Migration Lens. So I will share my my thoughts through a presentation. So let me see if I'm able to do that with...
Share your screen, that's all.
Yes, I need to... just bear with me for one moment. Okay, so if I do that, and then go here, share my screen. Okay, I think you're able to see my screen now. And let me see if I can then do the share screen, full screen mode. Okay, are you able to see my presentation, Rim?
Yes, very well.
Very good. Okay, thank you. So I will put 4 points across. And first, I'll talk about the COVID-19 crisis compared to other crises. I think you have heard that before, but I'll repeat a couple of things. Impacts on migration, and then impacts of the crisis on remittances, and finally, policy interventions. So on the first point about COVID-19 compared to other pandemics, and then the other comparator could be the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. We have a detailed table in the brief, and what I would do now is just focus on 3 important comparators. The first is the Ebola. When we think about pandemic, Ebola comes to mind. 2014, 2016, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone were affected, and only 3 countries were affected. And these 3 countries are mostly countries that have migration out. People from these countries leave to work in other countries, but these are not immigration countries, these are emigration countries. So they receive remittances. And what we saw was that people couldn't leave during the time of the difficulty. When you have a natural disaster or you have a financial crisis, let's say Nepal's earthquake, Haiti earthquake, Philippines cyclones, El Salvador and all cyclones. At that time, people were able to move out, and also those who were already out, migrants, were sending money home. So there was that counter-cyclicality to remittances during times of difficulty. With the Ebola crisis, people couldn't move out from the countries that were impacted. That said, people who were already out, the Guinean, Liberian, Sierra Leone people who were outside, migrants, they sent money home, but they did not go back home, because what would you do going back? You might die, right? So they sent more money home, and that was helpful. We don't have good data on that, but we know that the counter-cyclicality worked out. Then you compare that with the global financial crisis, which is not a pandemic, but a global financial crisis. A lot of countries on both sides of the Atlantic, the rich countries, were impacted by the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, more than other countries. And at that time, these countries, because they host migrants and they are source for remittances were actually cyclical, and they fell. So in 2008, 2009, the year 2009, remittances to low and middle income countries fell by about 5%. And then they quickly bounced back. So it points to cyclicality with respect to this economic cycle of the source country for remittances, the host country for migrants. And there are 2 lessons there. So when the country that is receiving remittances has economic downturn or a natural disaster, then remittances go up. So remittances are counter-cyclical. But when there is crisis in the host countries for remittances, host countries for migrants, source countries for remittances, then remittances fall. Then I want to bring in some lessons from Spanish flu. And we have no data on remittances and migration for that particular time. But the reason I bring that up is that's the closest thing that we have in terms of thinking about the length and depth of the current crisis. You probably know that Spanish flu had nothing to do with Spain. This is a strange thing. But just to point out, the one lesson from the Spanish flu is that it had an uncanny similarity to the phases of the current crisis, COVID crisis. And there were 3 major phases. And the deadliest phase was the second phase, which started just after summer. When the first phase was over, people thought time to relax a bit. And then the virus mutated. And the second phase, which started in late September, October, death rates shot through the roof. And the crisis went on for a third phase, and there were smaller phases like 4th, 5th, 6th until 1920. So it was a 2-year long crisis. I'll just stop there just to say that this current crisis has a lot of downside risks and less so the upside risks. With that, some points on impacts on migration, just a stylized fact that if you look at international migrants, there are 272 million international migrants. If you look at internal migrants, those who have migrated within countries like China and India, then the number is somewhere around 760 million. So that makes about 1 billion people as migrants. And now we know that they have been impacted. In fact, if you again look at the global financial crisis of 2009, the effect of the crisis was much more severe for on migrants than native-born people. This is a lesson that is to be learned, and I think you probably can't see my whole screen here, unless I can move it to the side. The main point I wanted to make in this slide, if you're able to see, is that the red line shows unemployment rate of foreign-born people in European Union countries, and the blue graphs are showing unemployment rate of native-born people, the citizens. And foreign-born people always had higher unemployment rate. During the global financial crisis, 2009, the unemployment rate increased much more for foreign-born people. And then 10 years later, in 2018, while the unemployment rate for native-born people went down, that for foreign-born people stayed high. This is important, first to point out that migrants are much more vulnerable to crisis now, this crisis. And second, that vulnerability to unemployment can be there for next 10 years. So it's not going to go away anytime soon. So with that, a few points on remittances, impacts on remittances. I pointed out already that in 2009, remittances fell by 5% because of the global financial crisis, and then they bounced back quickly in 2010. The same year, actually foreign direct investment fell by 33%. That just shows that remittances, because they are sent by a large number of people in small amounts, there is much more resilience. Foreign direct investment is driven by profit motive, and when risks rise or economic returns fall because of the crisis in the recipient country for foreign direct investment, then foreign direct investment actually pulls out. So it fell 30% during 2009. And this time, the fall in remittances, the red line, we expect that 2020 will see a fall of 20% in remittance flows to low and middle income countries. And the fall in foreign direct investment would be actually 37%. And remittances last year were already record high, $554 billion. They were already, last year was a milestone. Remittances surpassed foreign direct investment flows. And prior to that, we knew that remittances were already larger than official development assistance, more than 3 times the size. That phenomenon of remittances being higher than foreign direct investment will still continue, because remittances are falling by about $100 billion. Foreign direct investment flows are falling by more than $200 billion. That is not to say that the fall in remittances will have less pain for people. The fall in remittance flows will actually hurt many, many more people in many ways, because as I pointed out, billion people as migrants, they probably send money to a billion more people. And you are looking at then 2 billion out of 7.8 billion or so of humanity, right? So it's a large number of people who are going to be impacted. And the reason for the fall in remittances would be not because migrants are coming back, because migrants are stuck. They are stranded in the origin community. Migrants are stranded in the host communities, mostly in cities, because urban economic centers actually disproportionately rely on foreign-born people, on migrant workers. So cities like Paris or Madrid or let's say New York, London, Mumbai, probably 25, 30, 40% of the workforce are people from outside the city, outside the country. And migrants tend to cluster around economic centers. And right now, because of the travel bans, not many have been able to return. So at any point of time, the flow of migration compared to the stock is 2% or so. It's not much. We think it is a large number. No, it's actually only about 2, 3, 4 million people that move per year. Return migration is going to be higher, but it is not happening yet. And in fact, if people want to go back, where would they go back to, right? There is unemployment back home as well, and perhaps even worse healthcare facilities. So migrants are staying where they are. Some people are returning, and so there is a need to take care of the migrants out there in terms of healthcare and social security, cash transfers, access to hygiene, good hygienic conditions, health conditions. There is also a need to help return migrants come back home, because they will also need to be quarantined, and there is need to help them. But the fall in remittances is not because migrants are coming back. It is mostly because wherever migrants are, their incomes have fallen, they have become more vulnerable to unemployment, and they're not able to send money. And on top of that, you have the falling oil prices impacting fiscal situation in the Gulf cooperation countries, in Russia in particular. And in Russia, there is a third factor, which is the exchange rate changes. A lot of money from Russia goes to places like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, or even Moldova, let's say, in the form of ruble. And ruble has depreciated significantly against the dollar. So in dollar terms, there is a valuation effect, and Russian remittances have fallen. And that exchange rate effect will also impact when remittances come from, let's say, Europe in euro terms, or from UK in pound sterling terms, or from South Africa in rand terms, because those local currencies, if they depreciate against the US dollar, then the valuation effect will be accentuated. So remittances are expected to fall by 20%, and in Europe and Central Asia, the fall is expected to be about 27%. And we are already beginning to see some of these drops. So if you look at the high frequency data, which are available only for a handful of countries, you already see that remittance growth on a year-on-year basis in April and May, which is after the COVID crisis, have gone into the negative territory. You will hear a bit about today's news that Mexico's remittances in May went up, but we know that during Mother's Day in May, Mexicans sent a lot of money home. Always during the monthly seasonality, if you look at it, the peak in remittance flows is always achieved in the month of May. So I think it's an aberration. The more stronger trend is a downward trend, where remittances to Latin America are also expected to go down by close to 20%. So with that, the policy interventions, the first one, which is not specific to the current crisis, but it is a general underlying policy message that stays with us, is that it is rather strange, but it is true that sending money home to one's own family in one's own country, or to oneself, one's own account back home, can be very, very expensive. And there is a Sustainable Development Goal target of reducing remittance costs to 3% by 2030. The current cost is more than double that globally. And in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of sending money is close to 9%. We know that about 2/3 of migrants, international migrants in sub-Saharan Africa, are actually in other sub-Saharan African countries. And intra-regional remittances are very high in sub-Saharan Africa. But so are the cost of sending money from one African country to another African country. It can cost more than 15% for South-South remittances within sub-Saharan Africa. So that remains a major goal, which ought to be addressed with some urgency now, given the fact that a fall in remittances can throw a lot of people into poverty again. And then the short-term, very immediate term policy responses could or ought to address stranded migrants, so supporting stranded migrants, it ought to address giving access to social services, providing social services for migrants in the host communities and their families back home. And there is also a need to support the remittance infrastructure. Something as simple as recognizing remittance services as essential could actually help people send money, because now somewhere around 80 to 85% of international remittances are still cash to cash. And even if migrants send money, they cannot go to a store to send money. In the past, they could call a friend who is going home to send money, but no friend is going back home now. So there has been an impact on remittances purely for logistical reasons as well, and declaring remittance services as essential could help. Online remittances are growing 2, 3 times faster than the cash-to-cash remittances, and we have a lot of anecdotal evidence of that. But the fact is that online remittances are small so far. Cash-to-cash remittances are still 80 to 85% of total remittances. And for online remittances, you need bank accounts. And most of the migrants don't have access to bank account. We probably know that somewhere around 19% of households in the US, in the United States, are underbanked. Somewhere around 8% of Americans are unbanked. So you can imagine what happens to migrants, especially undocumented migrants. They don't have banking access. So there is that need to increase banking access, financial inclusion for migrants. And then there are these medium-term and long-term policies. In particular, one area that is going to be very important is the need for more doctors and nurses and more IT workers, but definitely more doctors and nurses. And the supply of doctors and nurses was already a problem, raising the specter or concerns about the so-called brain drain in developing countries. That problem is going to get worse if there is a problem, that is. So let me stop there and just point out that our conduct and policies ought to be inclusive of people from different places. By helping migrants, we would be helping many more people all over the world, including ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dilip. This is a very clear presentation on the migration and remittances issue. And I think, in my view, this matter has to be on the top of the agendas of the G20 because of the number of migrants which are not only stranded, but they are losing their sources of income. And at the same time, the impact on their own countries, which are home countries, is dramatic, as we heard it from Ralph. So I would like to give the floor to Cinzia for the discussion. Please, Cinzia.
First of all, many thanks, Arim, for having me here. Many thanks for the very interesting and encompassing presentations. I have the task to comment on the work of 3 international organizations. So in this sense, it's quite difficult. Just want to share some reflections with you and maybe to put some issues on the table. Now, let me start with the issue of remittances. Maybe also going back to one question that Arim raised earlier about the fact that basically in the top 10 receiving countries of remittances, we don't see any country from North Africa or Middle East. One reason, I mean, it was already mentioned by Ralph, is that these countries are larger than those who were on the list. And as a share of GDP, maybe the numbers are smaller, but they're still extremely important, especially for Lebanon, Jordan, but also Egypt. So we are still talking about 5, 6, 10% or even more of GDP. For an economy as large as Egypt, you can imagine that this is quite a large amount. Now, the literature on the role of remittances on growth is actually suggesting that we can have different impacts when we talk about growth. And Ralph also pointed to some of these different impacts. But I think what we are discussing now, and what is really crucial now, is that remittances are an important source of income. And this crisis basically materializing as a very large shock, negative shock on income in receiving countries. And these are countries where, of course, the governments have quite limited room for stabilizing, if you want, such shock on the impact on the income, and basically to protect those who are most hit. Now, the fundamental question, besides the role of or the room of governments, is basically whether this shock is going to be temporary, whether this is going to be persistent, or whether this is going to be even permanent. Because this will really determine the consequences for receiving countries and for future reliance on remittances. And I think here there are three main sources of uncertainty, if you want. The first one really relates on the state of the pandemic. So basically whether we can assume that more or less, even if we are at different stages, the pandemic is getting under control, or whether rather we could expect other waves, like it was the case, for instance, of the Spanish flu or with other experiences, so that a number of the forecasts which have been now produced have to be revised and assume that actually the situation will be much worse than it is now. The second question is really about the impact of the lockdown. So the macroeconomic impact that we are observing is of course driven by the health crisis, but above all is driven by the lockdown. So the measures basically to protect against the spread of the disease. So how harmful, if you want, these containment measures have been on the economy. And it's not only related to the fact that production has been suspended, if you want, so has to be blocked for a certain period of time, and the same for consumption. The question is whether this holding off, if you want, of the production is now leading into defaults, so actually permanent job cuts, and for instance the impact on commodity prices like oil, so that basically we are going to observe more permanent effect also on jobs and on the production overall. This in fact links to what it was said earlier about whether we can see a reduction in the hours worked for the time being, or whether the impact will be actually delivering job losses. So this is really very crucial. The third point, I think the third source of uncertainty in order to establish what will happen in the future is whether this health crisis and the pandemic, or the experience of the lockdown, is going to change our consumption patterns and our production patterns, and maybe even our behavior. And with our behavior, I mean whether we are still all very interested in traveling, at least as much as we were doing earlier. And when it comes to really consumption and production, and especially on production, I think that the question is to what extent this crisis and the experience of the lockdown and being confined will accelerate certain trends which were already ongoing. And this very much links to what it was said about digitalization and automation. It's about whether these trends which were already ongoing, we were all using internet and sometimes webinars. Now we are communicating basically on a daily basis, most of the time through digital tools. So is it going to persist? So certain trends will be accelerated and amplified, which in the future may lead to growth and reallocation of resources towards maybe other sectors and other opportunities, but which in the transition towards this new equilibrium may lead actually to other job losses. And in particular, will hit those who do not have the education or the skills to basically take up the opportunities which are provided by technology. Then I want to make a very last point on, I think, which is very important, which was raised earlier, which is what can host countries do and what receiving countries can do. And I think quite a lot was said. One thing that I want to maybe emphasize, which is based on the experience of Europe, I mean, probably the place I know best. One of the most important measures that were taken in Europe, and this has resulted even in support from the European Commission side, it was to put in place short-term work schemes. So this basically is a way to protect employment. It's not the usual unemployment support scheme, but it's really how to protect jobs and basically to reduce or avoid layout of people through subsidies which are given by the government to the companies or directly to the workers, so they do not lose their job, they work less hours, and they can maintain a stable income. I think this is turning out to be crucial. I mean, of course, all these measures are temporary, and again, here it's what it will make the difference is whether basically the economy is going to restart or such measures have to be prolonged. If they have to be prolonged, the support of governments is going to become difficult, even in advanced economies. So not only in the most vulnerable economies. Last point here is that these new measures, which have been put in place in most countries, have been extended also to atypical workers and self-employed. This was a crucial point because this is a recognition that the structure of the labor market is changing. And it's not only those who work in like typical contract arrangements, under typical contract arrangements, actually have the right to see their income protected. Of course, who is not protected are all those who work in the informal sector. And this is, I mean, it's an issue also in advanced economies, especially some, including my home country. But of course, there's a bit of a message in terms of what the countries can do is that the informal sector is very difficult if you want to be protected through standard measures, and which requires more specific initiatives, as it was mentioned in the last presentation. Very last point on what receiving countries can do. I mean, of course, there is room, which is quite limited for fiscal and monetary policy. Fiscal policy is very often constrained, and fiscal policy is usually for temporary shocks, so it cannot solve the problem if the situation is going to be very long. And it's not by chance that actually 2 weeks ago with Remo we had a discussion about how to provide debt relief to African countries and countries which are in a difficult situation. I will stop it here with maybe just a very last reference to the issue of resilience versus efficiency. I think this is crucial. It is becoming, it was on the table already for some time after the global financial crisis. Now it has become really the key issue. The question is, how do we make our economies resilient? What can we do in order to achieve the much needed resilience? I will stop it here. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cinzia, for this point that you raised in the discussion. I would like to start with Dilip, if he's still there. Yes. So Cinzia mentioned a couple of points, which I think it's true. This now, what are the conditions of the shock? Is it a permanent or temporary shock? What does it mean in terms of migration and remittances? What is also the impact of the lockdown, especially, for example, on the social conditions of migrants, because some of them are stranded, and then most probably, you know, their health conditions will be deteriorating. And of course, in a time of uncertainty where we do not know whether there is an eradication of the pandemic, then this might become a serious problem. Another point which I also picked, and it's extremely important, is how to go with the resilient economy and how we're going to move into that direction. So please, Dilip, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for excellent comments. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty about the depth and the length of the crisis. And, you know, some people are just already talking about some kind of bouncing back soon. And others are much more negative. But what is clear is that in the last 100 years or maybe a few hundred years, the world has not seen anything like what is happening now, where there is an effect on everything at all levels, whether it is international level, national level, city level, state level, household level. If you see a tiger coming from one side, which you wouldn't, but I'm just doing a hypothetical thing, and you see a person coming from the other side of the road, now the tendency would be to go towards a tiger, right? Way to just say that, when were we afraid of other human beings? So I think that this is going to have deep impact on human relationships, and the millennia of progress we made in getting over our superficial biases about color, race, religion, all of that are going to resurface with even more strength. So I am very, very worried that we might have lost a lifetime of progress, true progress that we have made as human beings, as educated people. And of course, there are the immediate economic impacts in terms of travel bans, value chains being disrupted, international trade being disrupted. I haven't seen good analysis yet of, let's say, the future of work. This is where Ekkehard and colleagues can do a lot of good by doing great analysis. I was struggling a bit with doing projections for migration flows, or migration pressures at least, for the next 15, 20 years. And I used ILO data, and I remember there are three fundamental factors: income gaps, demographic imbalances, and climate change. Income gaps are going to get accentuated now. The income gap between low income and high income countries is 1 to 54. It would take 118 years for that gap to close. Demographic imbalances, I had a major problem finding forecasts of employment. And that is where the current crisis comes in. What will it do to the future of work and employment levels? And climate change is the third one. So to me, it seems like we are in an uncertain world, but the fundamental factors that drive migration are there. And there'll be more migration pressure, in the sense people will want to move, but at the same time, the host communities would close the doors. So we are looking at major friction in the future, and I don't see any hope that developing countries, poor countries, can actually quickly do something and absorb a lot of their people. And money will run out very quickly with social protection. So there is that need to intervene for a year or maybe even longer, but we should be bracing for some very difficult times for the future. Let me stop there.
Yes, that's quite a pessimistic view. I would like to turn to Ekkehard.
1 second. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much. A great discussion and great points that Dilip and Ralph raised earlier. Let me maybe add something to the question about how permanent these job losses might become. And I think that this is also a question that we are asking ourselves right now. And one of the answers, I mean, you gave it in a sense, is that what is important is basically maintaining supply, maintaining the web of production, if you want, the network of production. So countries have started doing it. They gave out loan guarantees, they credit guarantees. They try to support companies as much as they could. The problem seems to be really in the capacity to reach these companies, especially small and medium-sized enterprises have difficulties to actually get funds and run out quite quickly. I mean, even in well-developed economies like the United Kingdom, it took them 2 or 3 months before companies, especially in the retail sector and restaurants also, could actually access some of these funds. So often they run out before they kind of had to close shop before they could even get the funds. Coming out of this crisis now, obviously it will be challenging to see to what extent can these companies survive that already have relatively small margins to begin with to repay all these guarantees. So I think that is an essential question that we need to deal with. What are the mechanisms that we can put in place now to help these companies to survive, despite all the credit that they had to pile up now in relation to that? And I think here the wider point that I was trying to make with my resilience comment at the end is that we need to find an institutional way of improving the way we function as societies, as economies. I think that there are some lessons to be learned, and we started looking into this more in detail. One of the things is obviously, especially in a crisis like this, and this is certainly true more for, let's say, a pandemic than for climate changes, it is important to react quickly to some of these things. So having a more decentralized administrative setup where you can identify more quickly what challenges are appearing, it will help you to react more rapidly. And you actually see that in countries that have a more decentralized public administration, they were much faster in implementing confinement and lockdown measures than in others that have had a more centralized way of dealing with these things. Another thing is, and I think that's also important, is the whole the provision of public goods, whether it's public healthcare, whether it is education, whether it's basic infrastructure. These public services tend to be more sophisticated in countries that have democratic political systems in place. And I think that we at the ILO, we are always insisting very much on social dialogue, which is basically a key element to that. If you want to provide the right public services in the right amount to those people that actually need them, then you need to have this type of dialogue system in place. At the international level, and I think that's another point that is maybe important to make here, is, as you mentioned yourself, we had already some resilient mechanisms in place after the global financial crisis. What were these? Well, basically agreements at the international level and kind of put together by G20 head of states in bringing clarity on how we should regulate our international financial architecture. And I think this is also true for a situation related to pandemics. It needs to be true to deal with climate change. And I think there is these global challenges where we actually need international stable architecture as much as Ralph was mentioning at the beginning herself. I think that these are key elements to building resilient societies and a resilient global economy. So I think that these are for me key takeaways point of this current crisis that need to be implemented, and that somehow conflict in a sense with the efficiency goal, where we try to over optimize maybe our systems up to a point that only one single company can deliver, or only a small amount of companies can actually deliver masks to healthcare professionals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ekkehard. Ralph, I also would like to hear from you, because we got this question from the audience. Do you see any role for the central banks to help remittances, and especially to reduce the cost of remittances? But beyond this, do you see that there should be a need for an international program to support remittances, flows, and all these matters that we have discussed before?
Thank you, Reem. First of all, I fully agree with Cinzia's comments, and I mean the way she posed these 4 or 5 issues. One just focusing a little bit on the issue of the remittances. Please let's remember one thing. When we are talking about the remittances, I started my discussion by saying this is over and above what is happening to the countries. Okay, so you already have the trade channel effect, you already have the tourism effect, you're already having all the remittances are now bringing in another channel of infection, if you like, because they're the ones that we used to rely on, as Dilip was saying, also, you know, to mitigate some of these crises, idiosyncratic crises. But because this is a global shock, the remittances are not able to be the lifeline that they've always been thought to be. Okay, so remember, so this is over and above all the other shocks that are related to this pandemic. The remittances are now adding another layer of concern. That's one. Two, in terms of this, you know, this uncertainty, how do you deal with uncertainty? Let's remember which countries are we talking about here. We're talking about low-income, fragile states. Okay, we're not, we cannot, we have to be very clear in our thinking when we talk about developed countries, or if you like, rich countries or high-income countries, and countries that on any given day, forget the COVID crisis, are having a hard time just managing their economy. Now they're hit by COVID, the implication of COVID, and now on top of it, the remittances and perhaps the return of their migrants whenever the borders are open. In fact, in some countries, they're actually, when the moment you lose your job, they're putting you on a plane and sending you back. I don't want to name countries, but we also read it in the newspapers now. You're being shipped home sick without your money. So the question is of the short-term versus long-term. I've worked on fragile states for a big chunk of my life at the IMF. One thing you realize is if you cannot survive the short-term, there's no use talking about the long-term. You need to be able to survive the short-term. You need to address the short-term issues to engage in any discussion about what should, you know, life look like in the next 5 to 10 years. You cannot engage with these countries when they are living, you know, day to day. You have to be able to, you have to stabilize the situation first, and then we can engage about what should we be doing. These discussions that we are so fond of in the first world, if you like, developed country, in the developed country context or rich country context, does not necessarily translate very well in the countries that we are discussing, presumably under the remittance impact. So that's one thing. The idea of the lockdown, let me, there's something with this lockdown issue. If you are living in the low income and fragile states, you're living hand to mouth. Informality is the name of the game, not formal. There are no formal. The formal sector is very small. It's mostly informality. It's mostly, we call it piece rate versus time rate. Okay, you work, you get money. There is no social insurance. Remittances are your social insurance. There is no contracts per se, the way we are in the, you know, in this kind of the advanced economies enjoy. So when you tell people, I'm going to lock you down, you're basically giving them the choice between starvation, because when they're locked down, they can't make money, therefore they can't eat, or going out and getting sick and die. And that's an awful, awful trade-off to put people in. Either you die of starvation or you're dying of infection. That cannot be the solution. So please, when we talk about lockdown, this is a you know, Europe, US, advanced economy discussion. Why? Because I am locked down right now in my house, but my salary is still coming in. I have insurance, I can call my doctor, but that is not the case in fragile states, low income states. So, which means the solution for them cannot be a copycat of whatever we do here. We just take it and apply it over there. We have to think differently. In fact, if there is to be a vaccine, I would say those countries ought to get it first. Africa should get it first. Okay, fragile states should get it because they don't have the options that we have. And while everybody right now is looking inwards, the solution is exactly looking outwards. As Dilip was saying, his hope that we continue to work together, that is actually the solution. It's not only a hope. No country will be able to get itself out of this crisis. Just picture yourself, country X in Africa manages to get a handle on COVID. Let's assume, okay? What are you going to do now that you've stabilized your situation? You want to export to whom? You want to say, come and visit my country. Who's going to come and visit your country if you're a tourist country? Who? Everybody's afraid. And the guys that used to have the purchasing power to come and visit you are themselves at risk. What this is saying, this is a global shock. So when I say we're all in it together, it's really, we are all in it together. We need to think collectively. So when I provided the solutions for the host countries, what to do, I wasn't saying that the host countries should develop a heart and care for the low-income countries. And no, I'm saying it's your own best interest to look after the migrant workers, because they're the ones that pick the asparagus and the strawberry in the fields of Europe. They're the migrant workers. And when they're gone, ain't nobody there to pick those fields. So it's in our best interest to stabilize the migrant workers in the rich countries, in the high-income countries, because they are an input into our output. And by stabilizing them, meaning giving them the same benefits that we are giving to our own citizens in terms of employment assurances, social insurance, what have you, you stabilize the remittances channel, which helps the countries back home. And if you really want to help the countries back home, we start there. We start by reducing the cost of remittances. As Dilip was saying, is there a role for the central banks in this? And this is the question. Of course, there's a role for the central bank in this. There are all kinds of, outfits that are advancing such ideas, which is maybe the central banks, because they know what are these accounts that are coming in, and they can trade. They know which are, they're sending money home to my mother, and therefore they can create perhaps a conversion ratio that is actually favorable for remittances. These are things that we can think about, including
Ralph, what do you think about digital currencies, central bank digital currencies? Can they be used to reduce cost for remittances?
The digital currency, the beauty of the blockchain technology and so forth, it's that rather than going through the SWIFT system, which involves about 6-7 parties and takes 4 or 5 days to get there, the blockchain technology allows you to see it in real time. Now, what you have to worry about, so there are definitely benefits, definitely, to digitization and the block technology aspect, but what you still have to worry about are a number of things, is that who is going to be in control of this corridor? Is it one company? Are you going to allow one company, to do this, for example? Or should be the central bank of the country that is in control of it? Because again, if you allow one company, and I don't want to name names here, that will control that corridor, how do you know how much they're going to charge you to convert from the currency, from the dollar into whatever devise I'm going to send it to, and then the conversion when it arrives there? You see, so yes, digitization helps tremendously. And I believe Ekkehard had a whole conference on that, the Geneva Labs on digitization, and where we discussed, remittances and impact of digitization on remittances. So it solves some issues, but it raises other issues. There's the other issue with please, I just want to mention it here, on the remittances side, which is the AML-CFT aspect, which has been a hindrance to reducing the cost of remittance, and we have to get our heads around this and solve it. Basically, the issue of how do you ensure who's getting the remittances, are using it the right way? How do you, all these, what we call the AML, the anti-money laundering, issues that come into this, these all have to be resolved before we can say digitization, is the full answer. It is relative to SWIFT, but we still have to solve other issues here.
Thank you.
One last thing, I'm fully on board with the resilience versus efficiency. Fully on board. If anything, COVID is just an example of how much out of balance with nature we are been living. How unsustainable is our current economic system. I mean, it is just an example. Once there's COVID, there'll be some other COVID, there'll be mutations of this until we realize that we need to rejig. We need a new paradigm that actually allows us to conduct our business, but in balance, in equilibrium with nature and with our fellow human being all over the world. I'll stop here. Thank you.
So the word that we can say in this panel, it's from efficiency, or maybe a little bit of efficiency and much more resilience to go forward. But I have one last question to Ekkehard, and then probably we should close because we are over time. Do you think the COVID-19 pandemic is really marking a shift or a shifting point for the labor market in Africa and Middle East?
Well, as I tried to explain before, I mean, I think that a lot of these jobs that are currently at stake here, there are jobs that are not easily being digitalized, at least not through teleworking. There will certainly be, I mean, the future of work issue came up earlier. There certainly is a potential for automation, but that has nothing to do with COVID. The potential for automation of a lot of jobs in these countries has been there already before, and we have done some study on this and show that actually emerging economies are the ones that are most likely losing more jobs due to automation simply because they're further away from the production frontier. And so these countries are likely to see a much more structural change. And so that structural change needs to be accompanied through policies that help people to move to different occupation, through upgrading at their education, their skills, etc. But that is not necessarily accelerating through COVID. I think what the key issue really is for these countries is invest in the digital infrastructure to actually benefit from some of these advantages, benefit from maybe the move towards more digital platforms of production and exchange. I mean, we are talking about, so now we're getting really into kind of some specifics, but if you talk about Internet of Things, where basically you can remote control or remote analyze the functioning of your devices, these require heavy investment in digital infrastructure to be operational. And I think that if countries want to benefit from these new technologies, they need to invest in. So the big danger, and that is certainly accelerating with COVID, is that the digital divide that we had already seen before will just worsen because of the lack of investment, the lack of capacity of these countries to invest in this infrastructure.
And here is also the role of the public sector, because
yeah, that's what I meant.
Exactly. So either it pushes for more investment in digital infrastructure, yes, or it will resist because they are not interested in transparency and more digitizing whatever they used to do. Okay, so I would like to thank very much the panelists, all the pictures, and I think I would like to thank you all for your collaboration on this webinar, for very great contributions. And then, as I mentioned, the record of this webinar will be available on our website, and also it is already available on Facebook. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again.